Okay, I have a really long podcast with my friend Laura. Hi, Laura, tell everybody what you're going to tell them today on the Tom Kelly Show.
We're going to talk about the infertility industry and about me being a sperm donor baby.
And we're going to find her birth father.
Yeah, well, not my birth father. He's my donor.
All right, let's start the show.
Let's do it.
Here we go. Trigger warning, spoiler alert, go check your 23andMe. You are experiencing a paternity test edition of the Tom Kelly Show. I'm here with my friend Laura High, who was on the show, a year and a half ago, maybe, with Sheba and Harrison, when we were trying to figure out if this was going to be a comedy and pop culture show. Laura is... I hate the word little sister. That's not the word, but she is. I remember when she was just starting out, and
I was 24 when we met.
Okay, and I was probably then, how old are you now? Or you don't say that anymore?
No, I'm 34 now.
Okay, so...
It's been 10 years.
So I'm 12 years older than you. Not bad. So I've known you... God, yeah, so there you go. We are old friends. I've known you, 12 years.
God, it's been 10 years.
And
Holy shit.
And I'm going through that whole moment of, oh my God, that's 10 years ago. But Laura... I could tell you how she's a great comic, and that'll come up later in the conversation. Laura is, I think, becoming famous on something that I told her not to do, on something that I told her would be emotionally unhealthy for her. And
I don't remember this conversation.
Yeah, well, because, there's a lot of little things, and I'm also trying not to totally... manage other people's lives anymore.
When was this? Because I don't remember this.
So tell everybody what you're doing, and then I'll tell you why I told you not to do it.
Okay, so
You're a TikTok star, stand-up comedian, Laura High. We'll give all the socials later. Okay.
So yes, I'm a stand-up comedian, but the thing that I focus the most on social media is the fact that I'm a sperm donor baby. And so basically a lot of my social media is doing a takedown of the infertility industry, explaining the ins and outs of donor conception, the laws, or I should say the lack of laws, and what the actual result of being a donor conceived person is.
So, and just when we get into Tom Kelly knows nothing about show business, but I also, when you were first doing this, I thought you were going down a dark emotional path with it. And I'm probably exaggerating how much of the conversation actually came out of my mouth and how much was in my head and saying, don't say this out loud.
Well, because the first jokes I ever wrote were about being donor conceived, and they were obviously extremely different than what they are now.
Yeah, no, the jokes were great, but then you were like, oh, and I'm going to find my birth father. And I'm like, that could be a pit of despair. And I think that's about it. The short answer is I think that could be a disappointing road. But then you go on the TikTok, and there's a market there are other people like you out there.
Yeah, there's a lot more of us.
So let's start with that. What did you start saying on TikTok? So you're donor conceived. I guess we need the background on you. You had a loving mom and a loving dad.
Yes.
You love them both still.
I love them both still. They're my parents. They're delightful. They're lovely. What's up, guys? But yes, no, I have my wonderful mom and my wonderful dad.
And explaining this very slow and dumb way for the old people here. You came out of your mom is your birth mom.
Well, my mom is, so we used my mother's egg.
Your mother's egg.
Both my parents
And you came out of your mom's body.
And I came out of my mom's body, but we got what was called a donor sperm.
Okay.
And that they purchased from my parents' infertility doctor. So the donor came from my mother's from my parents' infertility doctor.
At that point, did they know who they were buying from? Did they think they were buying like an 8-foot-tall basketball player in Germany or a Harvard scientist?
What they were told by their clinic at the time was, because they weren't when I was made, which was in 1987, they weren't allowed to pick the donor. The donor, what they basically said was, we match donors to the dads as best we could between hair color, eye color, ethnic background. But the number one thing that the clinic said that we match before anything else is religion.
Interesting.
It's such a choice. It's a weird little choice.
Well, it is, but then when you get into, I have friends who are Jewish who are like, we need to preserve the numbers.
Well, Jewish is an ethno-religion, so that is an ethnicity and a religion, so that's a little different.
Okay, but pause for a minute. Then you're telling me I could also choose between Lutheran and Protestant?
Apparently, yes.
Okay.
Because that makes a big difference.
I'll call all religion. Listen, whatever people need to hear to keep me from getting canceled, I just said that. But let's assume they were all semi-ethno-religions and the differences get smaller. You're telling me
well, Jewish is ethno-religion, but
Yeah.
like Protestant, Catholic, that's not an ethno-religion.
Well, and now I'll argue there's a big difference between, let's say, Catholics and Lutherans. But then there's like Lutheran.
As someone who was raised Catholic, I
Wait,
can't.
you were raised Catholic?
I was raised Catholic.
Oh, I always thought you were Jewish.
Well, because I'm half Ashkenazi Jewish.
But okay, so let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
The by the way, Ashkenazi is one of my favorite words.
It is such a good word. It's so amazing. Well, because you have to understand, like from a comedic standpoint, Ashkenazi, it's perfect.
Anybody can be a Jew.
It's melodic. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Ashkenazi is, it's a
in
fabulous
fact, folks,
word.
wherever you are right now, let's just pause together and say it out loud together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Ashkenazi.
It's perfect.
It really is. All right, so back to you.
Okay, yeah.
So you're now deciding based on religion, or your parents are that's on the list.
That was like, and that was now you have to remember at that time there were no options, so this was the only option.
What year did the donor conceived stuff really start becoming a business? In the 80s or 70s?
50s.
In the 50s.
Yes, that's when it started. But it was very secret. It was very hush hush.
Yeah, because.
Well, so what it was at that point, it's so bad. So at that point, it was very hush hush because infertility is still very stigmatized nowadays. In the 50s, you never spoke about it. And so what would happen is parents would go in, or a couple would go in being like, what's wrong? Why can't we get sterile? And so the doctor would typically go like, oh, ma'am, it's you. It's not your husband at all. Sir, just go home. It's fine. Everything's fine. Ma'am, it's your husband. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to implant you with donor sperm. You're going to go home, have sex with your husband, and then you're never going to tell him what we just did.
That's what it was.
That's what it was in the 50s.
And was that the test tube baby, as they would call it? That's not till the 70s.
That test tube baby is a completely different thing where you literally that's closer to IVF.
Gotcha.
But like sperm donor baby is like, you take sperm, you put it in a turkey baster and you put it in.
Okay. So I'm loving all of this right
okay.
now. Loving all of this. It's 1986. Your parents are now at the donor clinic. Mm-hmm. They're going through a list of things, and one of the few things they can put down on paper is religion. What happens?
So we put down, my dad is Scottish and Irish, and he's Catholic. And my dad has, blue eyes, brown hair. And so they give basically my dad's like stats and everything. They're like, this is the donor that
so they're trying to find somebody similar to your pop.
Exactly.
Got it.
And so they're like, there you go. And so the doctor was like, okay, good. We got donors. Awesome. This is easy. No problem. We will get one that matches my dad.
Okay.
Then what happens is, now they are trying, my parents are going through fertility treatments for 3 years. My mom's on hormone therapy for 3 years. She goes through 2 surgeries. Finally, she has a reconstructive surgery. And it seems like her system is finally all working. My dad's issues, though, could not be fixed at that time. I don't think they could still be fixed now. Because my dad had a particular heart issue. But my mom was now finally all set to go. But then her first ovulation was during a holiday weekend, which was actually the Jewish New Year, which I love. So the clinic was closed. And you have to remember, 3 years of hormone therapy is like intense on the body. It is like, I cannot imagine the amount of pain this woman was in for 3 years.
Okay.
So she was like, please, God, please, can we figure something out? Can I come in the clinic? Is there anything we can do? And you have to remember, my parents' doctor, I was the first patient. My parents were their very first patients. Very first patient at the clinic. And this doctor...
Did he cut him a deal?
This was also this was the doctor's very first patient as well. So this is his first day my parents walk in.
Okay.
So
Did they know that?
Yeah, everybody knew. Because this was still like... new-ish, like this was like still kind of getting on the map. It was the 90s when like this really exploded.
Okay.
But so my parents' doctor said, okay, this is what we're going to do. The clinic has to be closed, but we'll get the donor to drop sperm off at a hotel concierge. My mom will go pick it up, grab it, and then go to my dad, and you guys can inseminate it together.
You know what? I've never really asked about that stage of it. You do that's a step you do at home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, well, we didn't do it at home because even though the clinic was closed, my father's office wasn't closed. So my mom...
but we take the sperm.
And went to my father's office, and that's where I was inseminated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you don't say conceived, you say inseminated.
I mean, my mom said, and that's where you were made. So like no one used the word conceived around me. I was made like a Toyota.
Well,
I was, yes. Now, but I always joke because I love the fact that I'm like, Dad couldn't take a day off for this one. Dad, you couldn't take a day off.
and, I mean, was it? I mean, now I kind of have all these questions that I don't know if I can ask you. Was it romantic for them, or was it really business, like in the bathroom?
I have well, my mom was like basically like, you know, your father like inseminated. I put my legs up, and your dad went back to work, and my mom was just like on his couch with her legs up until she was like, okay, I feel good now. And, you know, my dad was sitting there with his little spreadsheet going like, all right, honey, keep those legs up.
Well, and now for those of you listening to the audio version of this, I don't know if you can hear the sound of my jaw dropping, but I think you could see it I feel it. I at least feel the muscles. I want to ask more, but I really don't. So you were made, inseminated.
You can say conceived. That's fine.
No, well, conceived. Well, I feel like conceived is a more romantic word.
Yeah.
But your parents are divorced, so does that take the romance out of this whole process? I mean,
it takes, well, I feel like, I mean, for me, this whole thing is like, this wasn't a conception story. This was an origin story.
Oh, by the way, there's a big ending to this, which we're gonna have to make a teaser at the end of this.
Sure.
At the beginning of this, because I know some things that the audience doesn't right now. Let's just pause for a second right now. Your parents sure put a lot of money, time, and energy into bringing you onto this planet.
Oh, God,
is that
they did.
appreciated?
So what it is, I mean, for me, so you just heard the way that I was made, and
I mean, and like that's a podcast, how it was made.
And I am looking at it going like, I love them to death, but at the same time, I'm also just like, you agreed to this? You two agreed to this.
Well, but right now, and again, all we know right now as the Tom Kelly Show audience is that your mom and dad got a baby made by they were the first customers at a clinic.
Yes.
First patients of a doctor.
Yeah.
What else do we need to know after you were made in a law office?
I tell you what, let's put a little fear into here as to why I definitely sort of cringe at this story a lot. So this was fresh sperm because this wasn't frozen. This was fresh. So it was donated that day, okay? It was made that day. Now the one law, because this is a very unregulated industry, but the one rule that the FDA has is that all donors have to get an STD test. This was fresh sperm at that day. We already know the clinic was closed. Chances are there wasn't an STD test. And this was in 1987 in New York City.
Okay. So that's one moment of fear, but did mom come down with anything after?
Mom was fine, but it was always, we're like, I'm 99% sure that my doctor broke the one FDA regulation and massively put myself and my mom at major risk.
Okay, but let's pause for a minute. Who is your father?
Are you talking about the man who raised
father.
my donor?
Who is your donor?
I do know who he is. I cannot say his name.
Okay, it's not the doctor.
It is not. It is his colleague, his friend. Like this is
somebody the doctor knows.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pause. Okay, so because we're gonna have to get one sentence to tease this later to get people on board for what may feel like a scandal.
I did think it was we did think for a while it was the doctor. We were worried that it was.
See, I remember that popping up.
We did think it was.
So hang on here. You're born now what? 1986 you're born.
88 I'm born.
88 you're born. Boom. There we go. Little Laura High comes onto the earth. Mom and dad love each other at this point. They are in as healthy a marriage as it could possibly be at this point.
It was okay at that point. Things were already
You're
happening.
growing up in Westchester. Do they tell you that there's mommy, daddy, and a guardian angel who...
I found out when I was 14 years old.
How did that happen? And what?
So they told my pediatrician as soon as like we, started working this pediatrician that I was a sperm donor baby. And the pediatrician was way ahead of her time because she was just like, you have to make sure that you tell Laura that because she has the right to know. And she specifically looked at my dad and was like, and you have to be the one to tell her because she's going to be self-conscious about the fact that my dad may not love me or might have issues because I'm not genetically his. And she was like, and that's why my dad has to be the one to tell me to like keep that worry at ease. And so they told me when I was 14 and my dad and I were in the car because that's where dads have serious conversations is in the car because they don't have to look at you. They can just look right ahead and be like, I don't have to It's emotionally contained.
And he was driving, right?
And so he's fully in charge of how long this conversation is. He can
No,
make it longer or shorter.
That's a power play, yeah.
It's a total power play. And this is how my dad starts the conversation off. He goes, Laura, do you know how babies are made?
Which is a fair question and also implies they forgot to have another conversation with you.
Well, it's like, and I'm 14 at this time, and I think my stand-up is already like starting to pop forward. Like it's coming, it's in the back of my head tingling. And so my response was, yeah, Dad, I've seen Skinamax. For all of us older people who remember Skinamax.
But when you talk about your parents missing an important conversation at 14, and I don't know my female biology, but you're a functioning woman at 14. And he's like, do you know how babies are made?
Well, it's such a thing on my dad because it's like, Dad, yeah, the conversation was had years ago.
Okay, good. Okay.
Oh no, it was.
So this was had.
This was my dad having his dad moment of just like, I don't remember, and just this was my dad checking out. But so my dad was dadding, and so. And then my dad was, and I said the Skinamax line, and he just was like, well, not you. And then my dad basically, we talked about it, and he told me.
You know how we have take your daughter to work day? Well, we had make your daughter at work day.
Basically, yes. And I remember it was suddenly like this feeling of just like, boo.
So it did. So was it a hit? You registered it.
It was that moment where like I fucking knew. I knew something was up.
Okay, because I was going to say, because I didn't ask the question. You felt loved until 14, or you always felt something was wrong?
I knew something was off. Like, I swear, I was like, was I switched at birth? Was I adopted? Something was up. Like, I knew something was off. I fucking knew something was off. And I couldn't put my finger, because I looked just like my mother. I look like a carbon copy of my mother. There are pictures of her and I in the hospital, and my dad. Like, it was like, so I was like, but I knew something was off.
Yeah.
And I don't look anything like my father. Like, my father and I look completely not related.
Okay.
But I looked so much like my mother that I thought, like, okay, I guess I just look like my mom.
So you now have these little lingering doubts are suddenly answered.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, then basically...
You just kind of live with it for a
I
while.
kind of just live with it, and I sort of just sit and I marinate in it for a little bit, and then I get to the age of 19, and
your parents are still together at this point?
No.
When did they break up?
They separated when I was 15.
After the bomb was dropped?
After the bomb was dropped.
That had to, like, kind of... mess you up?
Nah.
No, like,
because honestly, the sperm donor nest wasn't really registering at that point. It was just sort of like, okay, like it just the weight of like understanding what it was, because it's like you can't at 14 really understand how much this actually impacts your life.
Well, and also at that point in time, there's really no information.
There's no information.
And there's no internet.
There's nothing.
Well, yeah, or not much of an internet.
Not very little internet at that point.
All it is MySpace at this point.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, God. Oh yeah, MySpace.
No. So back to you here.
So
parents get divorced.
It's
not your fault.
It's not my fault. No.
Okay.
No. But
and you don't feel like it's your fault?
No.
Okay.
No. It's complicated, but I know that definitely not me.
Good. Or not the sperm donoring fault.
No.
But then what brings you to this next chapter of you turning this into a career?
I would say it came in layers. So at 19, I was talking about it with friends in college, and one friend, and this was something that I just never even again dawned on me, but they were like, do you know like the medical history of your donor? And I'm like, no, what do you mean? She's like, well, like, what if he had cancer? How would you know? Like, that's an important thing for you to know. And I was like, and I remember it was like, that was like one of the layers of going, oh, I don't know. That's a really good point. Like, that was something I had never thought of. And so then and at this point, like at 19, I was very interested in just knowing who my biological father was. I just wanted to know.
And I get that urge. I have reunited with distant relatives.
Yeah.
And I was raised in a very loving house, and I know my parents are my biological parents despite my best wishes.
But so then I basically was kind of like, I sort of was like in a little bit of a journey to go like, I need to know I need to know what my medical history was, and that I need to know. But I also was just like, I'd like to just know who the dude is. Like, I just want to know. And at this point, it's like, and again, I had a good relationship with my dad. It wasn't like I was looking for a dad, but I just wanted to know who the fuck this guy was.
Okay.
And that's always a very important distinction.
So you went on a quest in college to sort of start figuring him out?
So I started because what my mom was told by her doctor was that he was an Ivy League doctor who was just like my dad, Scottish and Irish and Catholic. So it was like, okay. So basically I just started searching through infertility. I started looking up just doctors.
And what year is this roughly?
I was 19, okay, so this was 2007, 2008?
Yeah, I mean, I also probably could have done 17 plus 88, but yeah, or 19 plus 88. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, 2008-ish.
So I'm just looking through
There
doctors.
is an internet. There is now
internet. So I can start like
listings.
shuffling through. So I just start looking up doctors. I start looking up Ivy League doctors who would have been in that area. And I just start shuffling, starting to look
near
for
the hotel in driving distance so they could drop the warm sperm off.
Because I did know where, hypothetically, the location. I started looking, because I knew who the doctor was. So I looked up him. I looked up colleagues. I looked up everything.
Now, did you even just try calling the doctor and saying, hey, you got a number?
Well, that's what I did eventually, I just eventually called up the doctor and was like, and I remember it was a very interesting conversation. I picked up the phone and I called the secretary and she was just like, hi, who is this? And I'm like, hi, I need to speak to Dr. Who's-he what it. And she was like, well, what's your name? And I'm like, and I just basically was just like, just tell him that I am, let's just name my mother, let's name my mom Sarah. And I was like, just tell him that I'm Sarah's daughter. And in 5 minutes, it wasn't even 5, it was 2 minutes, he picked up the phone.
Really? See, now that just seems like bad legal advice.
And he picked up the phone and he went, hi. And I was like, hi, I'm Sarah's daughter. Do you know who I am? And I remember the tone of his voice. He was just like, yeah, I know who you are. And I remember there was something about the tone of his voice that was just like, whoa. Like this was about to be a very serious conversation.
So it wasn't sentimental, patient one. How are you?
It was like, I can't explain it, but I don't know, but it was just something where.
But again, your instincts, your inner.
I think he was, I swear it was like he knew this was coming. He knew I was going to call. And it also, every instinct inside me said to me like, oh, there's more to this. Because there was a weight to, like, he was just like, okay, here it goes. Like it was a very interesting moment. And I will never forget the sound of his voice. And I was like, hi, so I would like to know who my donor was. I would love to get a number, what clinic. I was like, but I also really would love to know health history. I'd love to know, like, does he have a history of cancer or Parkinson's or literally anything? I'd love to know. And then he was like, okay. He was like, well, Laura, your donor was anonymous, so there's no way I know who he was. He came from a clinic that was all doctors and medical students. But unfortunately, that clinic burnt to the ground along with all papers, so you're including your papers. So we have no access to that, but I can guarantee that your doctor was completely healthy. There was no problem whatsoever. And that was the end of it. And I was just like, okay, well, thank you.
That sounds almost suspicious.
Even at 19, I was like, why is this full grown ass adult lying to me?
Well, was it a lie?
It's a complete lie. Well, as I have found out now, it is
okay,
a complete lie.
But what you found out the clinic did not mysteriously burn to the ground and
so my instincts were like, he's lying, but I didn't know to the extent. I'm 19 years old. I'm like, I don't know. Like at this point now, if I was on the phone with him, I'd be like, baby, no. I'd be like, babies, no. I know that that's not true, but that's really cute. Thank you so much for playing. But at 19, I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? So I was like, okay, well, thank you, man. And then I hung up the phone and there was nothing more for like 7 more years until 23andMe and Ancestry started rolling around.
And now I think this is where the story becomes something that everybody can identify with. I have, I don't even know how many of these stories I can tell on air. But I mean, I worked with a guy who his brother-in-law came home, or his sister-in-law came home with a new brother. Like that. I mean, there's a lot of people with those kind of stories. Let's pause for a minute. Your donor.
Yes.
Did he have a right to be anonymous?
When
you get into the contract of it.
Well, this is a tough conversation because
I mean, and I'll tell you a joke that I stopped making because of you.
Oh my God.
That's
too
influential. No, but I used to and this is old and hacky when you're first, doing stand up.
I love beginning hacky jokes.
Yeah, but
I love them.
when I would do the road driving down 95, the joke was, "Oh, I'm donating sperm at every fucking gas station, and that's how that paid for this trip and whatever."
Yeah.
And then I meet you, and you sort of think, "Geez, I don't want to cheapen
Thank you. I appreciate
or unless
that.
it was a really good joke, but it wasn't a good joke. It was, I'm donating sperm to supplement my bills or whatever. And I mean, and donating blood is just sad. That doesn't get a laugh. But
I can totally see that getting a joke and like.
If there were but if I felt there was a need for my genetic material to be donated, and I do believe donors, especially back in those days, had nowadays everybody goes to Uncle Frank, or we had Lucas Connolly on who said his donor was Lenny. His dad is Lenny, who was in town. But there's something to be said about, I want to help someone bring life to the world, but I don't want to deal with it later.
So here would be the thing. It's a nuanced answer, and that's why I sort of took a pause. It's a nuanced, complicated answer, but if I have to boil it all down to one word, the answer is no, you don't have the right to be anonymous. You don't. Because it's unethical. And that's to me the simplest answer. But let's go into the nuance, because it is a very complex answer. I understand why you think like, I just want to like donate, be done, have nothing to do with it and everything. But that is just looking at it from your point of view and just looking about how it affects you. You have to think about it from the child. Everyone has the right to know who their biological parents are. Everyone has the right to know now, donors, but here's the distinction, and I want to be very clear. I do not believe that donors should be paying child support, should have any financial, they should not be taking care of the child financially. They should not be in charge of any kind of parenting. That I don't believe, and I want to make sure that is two distinctions. But the child has every right to know who they are. Every single right. And the point of it is you as the donor are making a choice. You have the choice whether or not you want to donate or not. The child has no decision in this whatsoever. They have to live with the decision that all these people are making for themselves, for this child. And that is why I say, no, you don't have the right to be anonymous.
Going forward for the next minute, I don't think I have any opinions because I think it's so complex.
It's extremely complex, and it is a very complex, nuanced conversation as I bang everything.
No, this is good. My nuanced answer is, if you want to get really, like, we make fun of the Catholic Church a lot.
Which I love as somebody who's raised Catholic. Yeah. My confirmation name is Lucia.
But the Catholic Church, when you talk about it being 100 years behind the times, they were for years anti-IVF, anti-donating sperm, anti-this, anti-that. And then when you see a couple of these big fertility and surrogate cases go wrong, you go, well, maybe this is why the church was against it. And, you're absolutely right. A guy, like whoever, like it's really weird that a guy just paying for gas on I-95, to use my example, could potentially bring life into the world. Or is it beautiful?
To me, it could be beautiful. And that's the thing. Like for me, as a donor conceived person, I don't have problems with donor conception. I really don't. At its core, I don't. The problem is how we have shaped donor conception, especially within the United States, because it is shaped from a capitalistic point of view. It's shaped from a profit motive. This is the buying and selling of children. It cannot be for profit.
Well, it is not actually, I'll go two ways with you, or I'm going to, talk out of both sides of my mouth here, but it is not the buying and selling. It is the buying to create children. And then we could argue, especially now it's also could be arguably genetic engineering.
So we're going definitely down a few routes. So a couple of things with it. One, it's one of those things where when the profit is babies, when the product is babies.
The product is babies.
Product is babies. Right there, we have a problem. Right there, if the product is babies, because this isn't, as I always say, this isn't like they're selling.
No, it's a life. I mean, and we could argue about, and we could go back and forth on a woman's right to choose later, but when it comes out of the oven, it's a life.
But this has nothing to do with the right to choose. This is a completely different
or
thing.
reproductive rights, whatever wrong words I'm not using, but whatever it is, it's a life. I agree with you.
But this has nothing to, in my opinion, this has nothing to do with reproductive rights. It has nothing, not at all. This has nothing to do with it, because reproductive rights is a woman has a right to choose whether or not she carries the baby to term. This is consenting adults going in and purchasing a baby. That's what it is. Two completely different things.
Actually, I'm just going to throw this out because I do want to finish your life story before we do this. Sure. But are we purchasing a baby or are we purchasing the parts?
It is, because this is why I will always argue that it is purchasing a baby is because of intention. You're not buying sperm to just go and play with it, or buying eggs to be like, woo, I have eggs. You're specifically buying this with the intention of creating life. So it is, yes. And you are buying it, and you are buying it with the intention of like, I want these eyes, I want that hair. You are creating a baby. Yeah. So that is, it's
real life Build-A-Bear.
It's real life Build-A-Bear. So you are, this is and the product is the baby.
Okay. Now, before we get to the passion of the legal end, which I know you're doing a lot of work on your TikTok, and you're doing a lot of work, you went down to DC to discuss laws for this sort of stuff. But let's get to the... So I don't even know if it is salacious, but 23andMe comes out.
23andMe comes out, and Ancestry.
And suddenly you still think, even though you don't think it, the last answer you have is the warehouse burned down, Laura.
Yes, the warehouse burned down, and I was like, that's such bullshit, and I knew that.
But that's your last answer.
And so then I take Ancestry, and my mom takes Ancestry with me too, because we wanted basically to compare, because we were like, now at this point...
Now, does Ancestry at this point, it's a genetic test?
It's a genetic test, and you can connect with other people. So at this point, you can.
Okay.
Now, at this point, when we took it, we had a feeling my doctor was already lying, because we could look at me and go, my donor had to be Jewish to an extent, because I was literally...
You are Princess Leia.
I am... I have my lovely Ashkenazi features.
And and your Ashkenazi feature, I forgot. God, this is so silly, but you always have worn the vest. It's your signature thing, and just your ears. You always remind me of Fievel from An American Tale in the cutest way. You could be Fievel in the music. And I remember thinking that 10 years ago when I first, because you always wore the hat too.
I had a hat.
You had the hat.
I had the hat. I long forgot the hat, but the hat went away. But yes.
But anyway, you were very
I was
Jewish.
very Fievel.
Yeah.
But I would have Hasidic Jewish people come up and literally talk Yiddish to me. And I would tell them, because at this time I didn't know, and I'd be like, I'm so sorry, I'm not Jewish. And I remember them looking at me going like, what?
So
they were like, sweetie, are you lost? Did someone take you? Like, do you need to come home with us? And I'd be like, no, I promise, I'm fine. But they were all just like, okay.
I wish I could remember the song at the end. Somewhere out there. So wait, back to you though for a minute. Mm-hmm. So Ancestry.com, which I believe is different than 23andMe.
It's not really different anymore. No? I mean, it's just I think it really is just an interface difference at this point.
Okay, because 23andMe sounds medical.
Well, it sounds medical, but it's not. It's not medical. It sells itself as medical, but it isn't. It's not a medical grade test.
Okay.
So it sells itself.
Is Ancestry medical grade?
No.
Okay.
None of the take-home DNA tests are medical grade.
And it's what? Swap the mouth or
spit in a tube. And that's the thing that makes
like a COVID test.
Exactly. And it makes us crazy because everybody tells us, well, just get your medical history from 23andMe, and they're like, it's not medical grade, assholes. It's not. So and anybody who takes 23andMe as a medical grade test is like, that's dangerous. It's not accurate. You have to go to a genetic counselor, and you actually have to get your genes mapped out. That's a medical grade test.
And that's billions.
It's not billions, but it's a good amount of change. It's a good amount of money.
So now you do Ancestry. Mm-hmm. Your mom does Ancestry. And what happens?
Well, so we take the test. Now remember, all we know, what we were told about my donor was that my donor was just like my dad, Scottish, Irish, and Catholic. My mom's test comes back, and it's everything that we think it is. It's a lot of European. It's a lot of Polish. We look at mine, and it is half, 50% Ashkenazi Jewish.
Which I still giggle every time you say.
Literally 50%. I can show it to you.
Okay.
And my mom, we look at my mom's test, not a lick of Ashkenazi.
Okay. So.
And we're just like, well, there's Dad. There he is.
Well, there's the genetics.
Yeah.
You're mad now about Now, when your mom did the test back in 88 or whatever the year was, she was promised based on religion. Is that the same as ethnic heritage? Like, could you be the Jewish Catholic, like kind of you were?
Well,
like arguably your kids will come up 1/4 Jewish.
So this is where we get into very, very technical issues where it's like I feel like I need like a rabbi here and everything to discuss it because it is very complicated. So you can there's so many different like tribes essentially that like come out of like Judaism because it is an ethno-religion. So you have like Ashkenazi, you have Sephardic.
Actually, let me pause. Let me ask. I'm asking a simpler question.
Okay.
When your donor filled out that form in 1988.
Oh, there was no form he filled out. There was nothing.
But or whenever there was when they were pretending, was it spiritual Jewish or genetic Jewish?
So my donor is both. He is practicing. He's practicing. Sorry, I don't want to give away too much yet. My donor was raised culturally Jewish and he is ethnically Jewish.
Okay.
So on the genetic sheet, I was seeing the reflection of ethnically Jewish.
Gotcha.
I had no idea how religiously Jewish he was at that point.
Okay. Let's finish the Laura High story before we get into the politics details and stuff. You do the 23andMe.
Yes. So to answer your question, technically, yes.
But does it tell you who your dad is or does it tell you? So you do the ancestry. Does it tell you then, all right, and then there's Elaine in Wichita. You should give her a call. You have
a couple of years later, it connected me to a woman, and she was like, "How are we connected? Like how?" And she was my cousin.
It starts up cold.
Starts up cold, but then a couple of years later, a cousin pops up, and she was like, "How are we related?" And it was like, it was his cousin.
His cousin.
It was his cousin. Yeah. And she was just like, "Oh shit! I guess my cousin donated. Wow."
So now. Here you are in the middle of the night. You had your genetics. You thought you had your answers. And all of a sudden, you have a distant cousin, Mauve or Mildred, whatever we want to call her.
Yeah. Let's call her Mildred. I like
Mildred.
that. I like Mildred.
Is she a Mildred age? Was she older than you?
She was older than Mildred, I think, is appropriate.
Okay.
Mildred's appropriate.
Now, Mildred, I have a lot of cousins. In fact, I have a lot of first cousins. I've never met her. I've only met once or twice. Mildred knew your donor daddy. And
they were first cousins, so yeah.
But Mildred was willing to answer questions.
Yes.
And your question, and I'm going to guess your question. Your question was, by any chance, do you know any Ivy League educated doctors? Was that the question?
Well, it was. There were a couple of options as to potentially who could have been my donor because there were a few options for her.
Yeah, because how do you know if it was a donor daddy or his cousin Bob?
Well, there were 3 options. There was my donor, there was his brother, and there was his father. That all could have been potential.
You're right. That stuff still works at an older. Yeah.
Yes,
wow.
It does. So we had to sort of narrow it down. We had to go, okay, who was here at this time?
But she's putting the work into it, even though he may or may not want privacy.
They do not speak.
Ah.
So you have to get the estranged family.
You got to get the estranged relative to give up the, and that's your in.
And that was my in. She was just like, I don't care. She was like, yeah, here you go. I mean, she was very like, I will say for her, she was very, like she made it very clear, like we don't have a relationship. And I think she was being very kind about, and she said this to me very, very kindly because I think she knew that I was going to contact him. And she just was like, just letting you know, he's not the nicest. And she was like, and it's why we don't speak. And I was like, okay, thank you. So I took that and was like, okay, I will remember that.
I'm taking it. What went through your head when you took that?
I didn't know, but I could tell from the way that she told me that I was like, oh, she holding back. There's definitely more to this story. And I just filed this under going, okay, my donor might not be a good guy.
Okay.
And that was like, okay. And here's the thing. That's the way it is.
So she gave you 3 names or we narrowed it down with her?
We narrowed it down. So we basically were like, it could be this guy, it could be this guy. So we could be the dad, it could be him, it could be him. And we sort of narrow it down and we're like, no, I'm pretty sure it's this guy. We're going to name him, let's call him
Donor
Bob.
Daddy. We'll call him
Donor Daddy.
Donor Daddy.
We were like, I'm pretty sure it's Donor Daddy because it was like, because his brother and his dad were like, they weren't really in New York. Like it had to have been here. And then what I also did was I looked them all up and Donor Daddy was residents at the same hospital as the doctor who.
Oh my God.
So I was like, so they knew each other. And that to me was the connection because here's the thing. Who the fuck are you? I swear, I'm sorry.
No, you can swear all you want. Fuck.
Who Because I was like, my mom's doctor called up a guy and was like, can you drop off sperm at a hotel concierge? This had to be somebody he knew. That's not something you call a random person for. That's a friend. That's someone you know.
You know what? And I guess the only way to test is, folks, give me a call now. 1-800.
Let's see how close friends you are with Tom.
Let's see. Give me a holler right now.
So it was like, no, they knew each other and their offices. And so then I looked up his office. And his office was only 2 blocks away from the hotel, from where where he dropped off the sperm, and his office was only a couple blocks away from my mom's doctor's office. So I'm like, okay, they all knew each other, the doctor and the donor. I'm like, they definitely. So it was like everything was everything was going to donor daddy. Everything was connecting it to him.
Okay, so you got it.
Yeah.
Did you talk to cousin Mildred on the phone or all email?
We met in person. We had dinner together.
Amazing. Okay. Your mom is okay with you going on this quest?
Oh, she came to dinner with me. We all had dinner together.
How does your daddy, your raised your daddy?
My dad, yeah.
Yeah, he's cool with it?
He's being great.
Okay.
Yeah, he's being very supportive.
So you have a name?
I now have a name.
You have a phone number?
I saw a picture of him. I was able to look him up. And
Okay.
I found out.
And this is what, again, just for the timeline, what year are we at now? 2014, 2016?
No, this had to have been, this had to have been 2018.
Okay, so pre-pandemic?
Right before pandemic. And so I write him a letter.
Handwritten or typed?
I typed it because my handwriting sucks.
Gotcha.
And I didn't want him to judge me. I put like some photos in there. I, asked for medical history and stuff like that. And I try and just be really respectful because I'm like, I don't want to scare the dude
And you
off.
send it to his work or house?
I go to his office and drop it off. Because I just was too terrified that it was going to get lost in the mail. That I was like, no, I'm going to go to the office. And I was just like, and I saw his secretary and I'm like, hi, is Dr. Bloody Blue here? And she was like, no, he's not here. I'm like, I have a letter for him. And she's like, okay, I'll put this in his mailbox. So I'm like, so it just for me was like, I know he got it. I know he got it.
What was it like even walking into his office?
It was really weird. It was really scary.
I mean, there's that...
Because, I don't know what's going to happen, if I see him. I'm like, is there going to be just this, I don't know, weird, wolf, just, child.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I don't know what's going to happen.
So you drop off the letter.
Drop off the letter.
What happens?
Nothing.
No call back?
No.
No letter back?
No. And I was ready for that. I knew that there was a good chance that could happen.
Okay.
I knew that that was most likely what was going to happen.
How long do you wait before you go further down the rabbit hole?
Well, so then a year passed by.
So that's a generous amount of time.
About a year passes by. Because at this point, I'm thinking at this point, I'm like, this doctor reached out to a friend for a favor. My donor wasn't from a bank or anything. I'm thinking this is the end of my story. This is it.
And
cool.
And let me just recap, see if I digested that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a year and you're thinking, all right, my mother's infertility doctor said, hey, we don't have any sperm at the bank or whatever right now. Hey, Frank, donor daddy, could you just put a little in the can and drop it off at the Ritz?
Essentially.
And you were okay with that?
I mean, it was weird, but I was like, this is what I was accepting reality.
But I feel like there's another domino.
So then a year later, I get a message from a girl, and she was like, I know this is going to be really weird, but I think you're my sister.
And what platform do you get this message on?
I got this, I think on Instagram.
Okay.
Facebook. No, it came through my website. It was a message through my website.
Which is now weird, isn't it?
It's so weird.
No, because and I've gotten a couple of weird personal messages and a couple of weird personal messages that weren't from me through my website.
And I got, and I just remember going, wait, what? Because I never thought that was possible because of how I was made. I was like, there's no way I have siblings because it's not like I came from a bank. So I was like, there's no way I have siblings because I knew that sometimes donor siblings had
that's what you thought. That's what I thought.
And I was like, siblings never even entered my brain. Now, I knew that my donor had children at this point. So I was like, okay, I do have siblings, but it's just my donor's children. And that's all I knew about. But then she was just like, I think I'm your sister. And I was like, and I called her. And I remember, again, it was the weirdest thing. I picked up the phone because I called her. We called immediately. And it was like I heard myself. Her voice sounded just like me.
So you knew on that first note?
On the first note, I was like, this is my sister. Oh my God. And she sounded like me, like the cadence of her voice, the way she was getting. Now, unfortunately for her, she's a couple years older than me, and she was never told she was donor conceived. She found out by complete accident.
By doing a 23andMe or the
and
Ancestry.
I was like, oh my God, I have a sister. She was like, well, actually, you have 3. And I was
Because
like,
she's been doing work on this.
and I was like, wait, what? And she was just like, well, my sister, my full sister, is also your donor conceived sister, and I've also found another sister of ours. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I just was like sort of dumbfounded. I was like, are you, what? And she was just like, and I was like, I have 3 sisters. I have 3 sisters. I went from no sibling to 3 sisters. And I was like, are you serious? And so then we basically, that was when everything exploded. That was just like this like moment of just.
So you realize you're not alone on earth. You were raised an only child.
I had a sister who was 15 years older than me from my father's first marriage who was adopted. So like I had sort of a sister, but
you weren't raised in the same house with that.
No, so we didn't like have that sister relationship.
Yeah.
So I was essentially raised as an only child, and the only thing I wanted as a child was siblings. That was the only. I begged my parents for siblings all the time, and now
You have them.
and then
Are they in the area?
so. So now let's skip a few years. I've also found a brother. So now my brother is in the area. My brother does live in New York City.
Okay. Half brother.
Half brother, yeah.
I think that's important just as
There's
we're trying to figure this stuff
half-brother.
out. So you discovered you had 3 half sisters.
Yes.
And
Also my donor and his children all live in New York City as well. So I have his children who are also my siblings. They're also in the city.
let's put the siblings on the side because that's a whole other form of curiosity.
Yeah.
What stops you from going to the office and just waiting for him to come into the waiting room? Which is what I would do.
Okay.
And I would just say hi. Hey, donor daddy. I just wanted to say hi on the way in.
I'm waiting. So for me, what it is.
You're waiting for the film crew.
I'm waiting. That to me is the last straw. That to me is when I have no other options, I will do that. I'm trying very hard to be as respectful as I can to him because I understand this is not what he signed up for. Because when you talked about rights to anonymity, I understand this is what he signed up for. And
Because he's got a wife, he's got another kid.
He does.
Is he older, younger?
He's older. Now, my donor is an OB. Now, my donor, and I think a big sorry, I was trying to figure out. So I do want to respect the fact, like, I understand this isn't what he signed up for. The problem is, though, he is also a doctor. He understands the importance of medical history. And me and siblings who I've talked to is we have been suffering medically quite intensely. And we are literally, and what was it? A few months ago, I sent him one more email basically saying like, look, dude, I just want my medical history. So do my siblings. There's more of us. Like you, and there more will come in.
Well, you want his medical history.
I want his, which is my medical history.
And his family's medical history. Now, as a guy who comes from families which are a little weird in their own ways, my medical history on my father's side is, we think it was this. We think it was that. Like, it's not, like, there's not really any details, like...
okay, so you know you're both your biological mother and father, right?
I know my biological mother and father.
Okay, so you would know if your biological mother had breast cancer, right?
I know what my mother and father have both had.
Okay.
Now, going further up the line or around the line, we don't know much.
But you still know, like, if your mother had breast cancer, your father dropped dead of a heart attack, you would know that.
Yes.
Great. We don't even know that. So that, to me, that's medical history right there. That basic sense of, I have no idea if he has ever been diagnosed with a congenital heart disease. I have no idea if he was ever diagnosed with schizophrenia. I don't know if he was ever diagnosed with, I'm just trying to think, of autoimmune disease, like autoimmune issues. Like, I have no idea, even just him. So like, I'm not even concerned right now about extended family. Him alone, I have no idea.
Now, I'm going to go heavy.
Go heavy.
Because I don't know what my opinion is. So if I sound judgy, I apologize.
No. I promise.
But I have two very different sides of me right now.
I will listen to you with grace.
No, but listen to me with grace because, it's his medical history. Does he have to tell, like right now, if I have a kid, your father says, you know what, I don't want to talk to her anymore. Does he have an obligation to tell you if your dad goes off into the sunset Does your dad have a right to ignore his children once they turned 18?
So I guess that there's two answers. One, legally, yeah. I mean, the father doesn't legally have to do anything.
Yeah, like you're the dad who raised you. If he decides to cut you off, doesn't want to tell you he has cancer, is that his business?
Well, so again, two answers.
Yeah.
Legally, yeah, they don't have to. But ethically and morally, you just sent your kid a death sentence, potentially. Like, that's...
Yeah.
Ethically and morally, that's very problematic.
And just so can we at least, and you tell me if I have to cut this sentence out, but you have things going on. There are things going on.
Yeah,
That.
I have medical issues that I'm going through right now. And my sisters do as well. In fact, their issues are significantly worse than mine.
And a little bit, and for there, how do I, blah, 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 blah. Just knowing what else is going on and how you handled it would be useful for you to actually stay healthy and stay alive.
It would help with diagnosis. Like, people don't really understand how honestly life-saving a medical history could be. A very famous story, you can look it up in the Wall Street Journal, is about the Stephen Gunner story. He's a donor-conceived person as well. Stephen Gunner was born donor-conceived sperm donor, looked like a completely normal average sperm donor profile. He was born at ages 4, and at the age of 4 he was showing massive mental illness, signs of mental illness. At 4 years old he was showing okay, we need to provide help for our child. The parents took Stephen to therapists, psychiatrists, starting at the age of 4. And they always were asking, well, what is his medical history? They would always show the donor profile saying, nothing here, here's our side, but this is what it is. And they're like, okay, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So they kept moving forward. Nothing's improving. Okay, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Maybe we can try some medication. Nope, nothing. Okay. And Stephen kept getting worse and worse. And Stephen kept just suffering. Just absolutely suffering, and just was miserable. He was in and out of hospitals, just very, very just suffering. And so then what ended up happening was, in his early 20s, finally he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And at this point, he was just very his mom was, I've spoken to his mom, and his mom was he was hurting all the time. And he OD'd and he passed away. And so the mom, and I adore this woman so much, she was made it her mission to be I need to make sure that I find every one of Stephen's donor conceived siblings, because I want them to know that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, just on the off chance that they might have it too. And so she found a lot of the siblings, and through the siblings was able to find the donor. The donor, 2 years later, also OD'd and passed away, and was diagnosed with schizophrenia as well. And so then she was able to find the donor's mom and figure out what happened, and found out that the donor donated when he was 19 years old, but when he was 14 years old was put in the hospital because he was threatening his father with a baseball bat, and he was being very violent, and was in a mental institution for a certain amount of time. I think it was a month or something, but he was in there. Was not diagnosed with schizophrenia yet, but was potentially showing some signs that maybe something was going on.
And if they knew dad had it or somebody else had it, they could treat it quicker, you're saying.
And basically, yeah, essentially, yeah. And so he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. If they had been able to have contact with the donor, if they had known that the donor was in a mental institution for a period of time, they could have been able to give that information, because typically
and here's my I love the story.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you one simple question, because I want to get back to the big things that are about you.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between I don't want in Irish families, it's we just don't talk about it. What's the difference between I won't answer your calls and we just don't talk about that?
What's the difference?
It's, you just hit on the schizophrenia thing. Mm-hmm. There's a second or third cousin calling, people saying, hey, just so you know, I have this and this, depression and whatnot. I'm like, yeah, well, we're all fucking depressed. We're Irish and Italian. We're Italian. What the hell are you talking about? Everybody's depressed here.
I mean, it could be literally life-saving information.
Okay.
And that's the difference is
so whether it's you're in a Yeah.
Schizophrenia can be, I mean.
No. And I don't want to go down that road because I think we're sidetracking from you. I don't disagree with you. I just wanted to get a clear answer.
But just essentially,
no,
if Stephen was able to get an earlier diagnosis, he could have been getting treatment and lived a much more like he could have been treated and gotten the proper care.
And I think that's the sentence. Well, we may cut the whole damn story out because I want to focus on you.
Sure.
Me. Have a guy out there who is your dad.
Yes.
We're going to fix that later. You're going to go find him later. That's a to be continued story. Mm-hmm. In the middle of this giant to be continued, you start talking about this on TikTok.
Yes. I do. I start talking about it, and basically where I start from, my first kind of, I would say my intention is I want to find siblings, because what ended up happening was I started talking to and getting connected to people who have been doing donor conception advocacy for a long time. And we start mapping it out of my donor because we now have a few siblings, and we realize that my donor was started donating in 1982 and started donating while he was in medical school.
Which now, just to, jokingly here, or not even jokingly, but I feel, or not to be flip, that's the word, not to be flippant, but I feel like in the 80s, if you were a doctor in Harvard, it was a way to pay the bills.
It's technically, they still treat it that way.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So he started donating in 1982. Then he donated all throughout medical school, graduated, and continued donating, at least for me. I'm so far the youngest of the sibling pod.
I mean, and now do you think he got money for this?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he did.
How much do you think you're...
Back then, I don't know. I know what they get paid now, but I'm not sure.
What do they get paid now?
Typically around maybe like $1,400 a month. You come in a couple times a week.
To just keep in...
Yep.
Okay. So now that's the next ethical question is...
How many babies from one donor?
Well, how many babies from one donor, and two, or how many times this guy doesn't know? Actually, let's go the other way for a second. All this guy may have known is I'm just getting milked like a cow.
This guy knew exactly what he was doing. My donor is an OBGYN.
Okay.
He's very aware of what he's doing. He fully knows how the system works.
Good. Okay. So now you talking about this publicly. Mm-hmm. There's no shame to it anymore.
No.
Okay. It also, in some ways, as a guy who has found old relatives and gone, that was a lot of tracking down for nothing. Mm-hmm. This has become your career.
This is now weird. Well, it started with me just trying to find siblings, but then the more I kept peeling back the onion and learning how the infertility industry works, suddenly became, I need to talk about this. Oh my God, this is horrifying how this industry works. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits off of babies, doesn't care if they get sick or die. It's legalized eugenics. It's completely legalized eugenics. They regularly sexually assault women. They make donors sick. They let kids get sick. And the more I kept going was like, what the fuck is this industry?
And here you are now, arguably are you a leader in this movement?
I don't know.
Or are you a leader in and it's not even reproductive rights. What's the word? Donor baby rights.
I would say I always joke that I'm the doorman. I'm the weird doorman who welcomes the public into our little world. But inside are the real advocates who are like writing the legislation. I make it palatable for people to understand and comprehend, but the people who are like literally doing the work, they're all inside. I'm going to welcome you all in. You can meet them. They're the ones who are doing the work, but I'm the one letting everyone in.
In a charming and comedic way.
You get people to listen if you wrap things up in a punchline and a setup. If you wrap something up in a joke, anyone will listen to you. So
what's next? I mean, now, first of all, okay, and not to say this 48 minutes into an interview, where I'm going to probably have to break this into two parts. There's no way the attention span, or people just drive slower to work. But what made me want to come back and have you on this show again was you're funny.
Oh, thank you.
And this subject is funny, or the way you made it funny.
No, it is funny. Like, it is. Like, I want to be clear. I'm allowed to say it's funny, and for any, like, I understand.
Well, after seeing your stand-up, it's funny.
It is. Well,
your stand-up is funny.
Putting sperm in, like, you literally have guys going into a closet masturbating, putting their sperm into a turkey baster. Like, it's fucking funny. But I will say, it is a very serious thing because, as the things that I just mentioned, there are some very serious consequences to this industry being as unregulated as it is. But yeah, it is but again, people will listen to you if you make them laugh.
So one of the gimmicks of this podcast over the years has always been we're taking lemons, turning it into lemonade. Mm-hmm. You have I just saw Ophira Eisenberg do a great one-woman show. I just saw a woman, Kim Kalish from LA, do a great one-woman show.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about you is you have the stand-up set.
Yes.
Is this a stand-up hour coming, a one-woman show coming? You have the great 6-minute tape. Are we going to be on TV? We going to Just for Laughs? What are we doing?
There are a lot of things coming down the pipeline. I have taken we got recently a very good tape of the sperm donor set, which, as you know, can be so
nobody has that, but nobody has those jokes.
No one else has my jokes.
Are you afraid of being known as Sperm Lady?
No, it's great. Okay. Me? I love it.
Yeah.
I have a sperm suit that I run around in.
Now, that's your TikTok now. You're half funny and half political on your TikTok, yes. Laura High.
Yes.
And you have a huge following on the TikTok.
On the TikTok, yeah.
And what are you trying to do with that? I guess because I think there's two yous.
I think
there's a you who might get a sitcom or a special out of this.
So
and then there's also, I think there's a woman who could actually make a difference in this country.
It's a couple of things. I mean, look, I am a comic. I want my comedy career. I want there are things coming down the pipeline that I'm very excited about. So stay tuned for later this year. But yeah, the reason that TikTok exists and what I'm the most proud of is, and I literally get this every single week, I get messages from donor-conceived people going, oh my God, thank you. I have felt so alone, because being donor-conceived is a very isolating thing. You do think you're very alone. And so I've been able to get more of our community together, to find each other, to be able to talk for support, and be able to rally everybody who has been potentially touched by the infertility industry or who just finds this subject interesting and wants to help out, and say, like, let's get together and change this industry. It shouldn't be this way, and we can make it safe. We can make it caring, and we can make it ethical. And this is something where even if you're not donor conceived or you've never used the infertility industry, what the infertility industry does still does affect you, because right now the infertility industry is pumping out kids like freaking Skittles, and they're making sibling pods that are over 100 kids. That's going to affect our genetic diversity as a society. This is going to affect everybody.
No, I mean, if you do it all in a town or a local geographic area, you're going to have kids with 6 fingers in 2 generations.
You're going to have, I mean, the accidental incest is monumental, but and it's also like,
and that's a great word, accidental. Holy cow!
A lot of accidental incest, but also, even if you don't think that this affects you directly, you might be wrong. For everybody who's listening, are you sure your sibling didn't donate? Are you sure that your sibling wasn't a donor?
Well, I'm going to argue in that case, is it my business if my brother's a donor?
It is if you have children, because what happens if his donor conceived siblings and your children end up dating
in the town?
Yeah.
Okay.
It absolutely is.
Or
hypothetically, what happens if, like, maybe you got together with one of his donor conceived siblings? I mean, it's a little bit of an age difference,
and even talking about how you thought your donor daddy could have been your donor granddaddy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's messed up. So there's things we can do.
Yes, there's absolutely things we can do. So right now, I was in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of some of the best. I love these advocates so much. We were advocating for the fertility fraud legislation. The fertility fraud legislation would make it illegal for a doctor to switch out the chosen donor sperm eggs for their own or any other that they feel like, because that is not federally illegal in the United States. It's only illegal in 11 states.
okay? And you're going to give me a number or something to call.
So there's many people to call. Hold on. I mean, obviously call your local legislature, call your local congressman and say, I want to see HR 451 passed.
HR 451.
HR 451. That's number one. But obviously, like right now, hold on. I can pull up these names. So right now,
Well, how about this? You could email me and we'll put it in the show notes.
I will give it to you in the show notes.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of, I have specific.
I feel like
like
that's going to be specifics and technical.
But
we're going to email these names and say HR 451.
HR 451, fertility fraud. Now, do you understand what I say when like a doctor can legally switch out sperm for his own? Like,
Well, actually, the way you have explained it to me, a doctor can legally switch out sperm for anybody's.
exactly.
And if it's his own, that's his own ego, and that's creepy in one way.
It's sexual assault. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to argue it could all be sexual assault if you don't get what you want.
Absolutely.
We always harp on the story of.
Well, and it becomes eugenics very, very fast.
Well, and it could also, I'm going to argue in poorer places, non-eugenics or bad eugenics, whatever you want, or anti-eugenics in that.
What do you mean?
Well, like in the case of your mom, if your donor doctor switched for his own sperm, that's a salacious, that egotistical prick wants to inseminate all of women everywhere with his own seed.
Yeah.
Well, what if he went cheaper? And if your donor daddy was making $1,400 a month or whatever the number is, what if he went for the $200 a month meth addict? You know, like that's a nut. Now, that also is sexual assault or whatever you want.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
I don't even know if it's sexual assault, but whatever it is, it's some form of assault.
Well, it's definitely, it's a misrepresentation.
Misrepresentation.
But I mean, like, there are plenty of donor conceived people who I've talked to where, like, on the donor profile, and this has happened now with a couple of pods, literally, where one pod is over 100 kids, and on the donor profile, it listed Italian. That their donor was Italian. They're like, I want that Italian donor. Turns out, was not. The donor was Ukrainian Russian.
Yeah.
That's now, and again, I know that might seem small.
No,
it might, but it's but when it comes to ethnicity and when it comes to breeding children, these kinds of things really do matter because it goes over to the eugenics line really, really fast.
Well, and you know, now there are people who will argue in favor of it if you're saving your race or whatever. You know, and now that sounds very creepy coming from a white man, but if you're in a dwindling Jewish population, you know, suddenly saving the numbers are dropping. And you say that about black people or whatever. We could go down the road, but overall, it's not regulated.
Well, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate, like, you know, obviously, like, you know, you want to, like, you know, boost your community's numbers. Like, I can appreciate that, but it all has to be informed consent. It has to be informed consent.
You want to go old-fashioned 1970s Catholic, ban it all. Yes or no?
No, we don't have to ban it all. No, we just have to be regulated.
Next one, gun to your head, quick question. Should there be a cap on the number of kids a sperm donor can have?
Oh, God, yes.
Number?
That's tough to say right now in the United States because the infertility industry has, like, blown everything out of proportion so much. I don't know. If it wasn't as bad as it is, my gut instinct would be like, let's follow UK's formula because the UK is much more regulated than we are. Their number is 10 families. So a donor is allowed to donate for 10 families.
Now, the 10 families could all live in the same zip code, though.
They could, but they all know who each other are. There is, when it comes to UK, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, Germany, and New Zealand, all much more regulated, and they've banned anonymity.
All right, here's all I know for sure.
Sure.
Is we've done this for an hour. And I could do this for another hour. And the next podcast is
We
on the
haven't
line.
really even gone into the laws.
I guess you'll have to come back then.
Yeah, we haven't even touched the laws.
All right. We touched your story. We touched your story.
Yeah.
And we will do this again. Deal?
Okay, deal.
Yeah, because already this is either going to be a two-parter or one real long one. I can't decide. Well, I'll let you decide. And yeah, folks, listen, do me a favor. Laura High, her info will be in the show notes. Follow her on Instagram and TikTok and follow her story, man. And if you get a chance to see her perform live, you're in for a treat. And the last big thing I'll tell you is share this podcast. I mean, this sounds crazy, but this is a very specific podcast. Well, maybe you could share it with someone who is affected by this stuff.
1 in 4 people use the infertility industry. And we all know that the infertility industry, they charge an arm and a leg. It costs so much. And the fact that it is as unregulated as they are, and they charge so much, is downright robbery. this is how you are literally making your child. It should be regulated to a freaking T. And as it stands right now, it is very scary. And again, I would like donor conception to exist. I am not trying to ban it in the least bit. I'm trying to protect all parties involved: donors, recipient parents, and donor conceived children. Everybody has the right to be safe with this. I want to see the donor conception just become donor conceived centered. That would be my number one.
There you go.
Yeah.
You've blown me away, my friend.
Yay!
You're not just funny, but holy cow, you are smart and compelling.
Oh, thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, share this with somebody who hit that description right there. And until next week, folks, you can find more at TomKellyShow.com. Good night, New York.